Hello again, and welcome to another exciting, interesting, educational, and enlightening episode of Social Studies. Today we are on 5B.3, the War of 1812. We've talked about the causes of the war, some of the background about it, and today we're going to sort of breeze through rather quickly the war itself and some of the things that happened during it. So this is the sheet that you have filled in one side of, and this, depending on which cohort you're in, we may have filled this in during class with you. It's possible that we have not yet filled this in, and we will do so in school if you have not. Although if you have not done, I'm gonna give you 7 and 8 either way, because in a couple of the classes where we did do it in school, they did not get 7 and 8, or that we talked about it but didn't have time to write it down. So patriotism and nationalism, we're going to fill in. The rest of this, if you don't have it filled in already, it is probably because we just haven't done it in school yet. So that's where we're at. Patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism, we said, was a love for your country, generally a good thing, whereas nationalism is sometimes defined as extreme patriotism, sort of taking things too far, thinking your country is better, more important than anyone else. Basically, not just better, but like you're the only one that matters, that your country can do whatever it wants, basically, because all right, so we'll talk about that more, but this is generally not a good thing. Now, in the early to mid 1800s, in the early 1800s, we're beginning to shift from Americans being loyal to their states like Virginia or Massachusetts or whatever, and starting to more buy into this idea of patriotism for the United States and loving and being proud of the United States. And some people do maybe take it too far and start to think, well, yeah, we're Americans, we can do whatever we want. That's sometimes a way of looking at nationalism, one of the causes of the war. All right, so we're going to move on from there. So we're going to talk about what happened during the war itself. You want to circle that word during. These are the events of the war. Note, this war lasted from 1812 to, it's a little more complicated than it, but you can put either 1814 or 1815. I'm not going to ask you the specific year it ended, and you'll see why in a few minutes. All right, things that happened during the war. These are the things that happened during the war: British blockade, Canada, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, New Orleans, and the Treaty of Ghent. And we're going to pretty quickly buzz through each of these. So be ready to go. Don't be afraid to use the pause button, but don't use the fast forward button, please. Thank you. All right. So Congress declares war against Great Britain. The very end of 1811, they're debating it, the 12th Congress. It will officially go into effect in 1812, which is why it's called the War of 1812. We know it involves the Northwest Territory, and some of the war is going to be fought here in the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, especially. They're going to see some action up here in Canada, and in various other places. Okay, first thing was the British blockade. Now, the British blockade, if you look right here and follow my red dot here, these represent British warships. The British had this huge navy, and they used it to their advantage to set up a blockade, kind of like a moving wall here, to stop all traffic coming in and out of the United States. So, the British Navy cut off all foreign trade. That's what you can write in the notes there for British blockade. The British Navy cut off all foreign trade, isolated the U.S. from the rest of the world. Now, it's a big ocean. Is it possible that some ships slipped through? Yes. But for the most part, this prevented us from trading with other countries, kind of like the Embargo Act had, but this is even more effective, and it really is going to hurt our economy, cut us off from the rest, stop us from getting help from other countries. So the British blockade, in the short term, is going to help the British win the war. We will see that it also has a little bit of a positive effect for the United States down the road, but we'll talk about that later. All right, Canada. Canada is the country to the north. Hopefully you know that. Canada at the time was a British colony still, And many, many Americans, especially those Americans who considered themselves to be war hawks, believed that Canada should be ours because we're Americans. And obviously, it would be an honor to be invaded by us. So, the United States had been trying to get Canada to join us ever since the days of the Continental Congress. We thought that Canada should be a part of our country. We included them in the Articles of Confederation. They sort of had a free pass to join at any time. They never did. So we thought, okay, we invade Canada. All of the Canadians are going to come out and be thankful and help us out. It ends up not working out that way. We try to invade Canada several times, and we are not successful in these attempts to invade Canada. And in fact, the Canadians come out and turn out against the Americans. The British end up pushing us back and gaining territory in the United States. For example, Detroit is going to be taken over by the British from Canada. Okay, Washington, D.C. Um, one of the most famous things that happens during the War of 1812 involves the nation's capital. Now, it's kind of hard for us to imagine today how close the United States came to disappearing from our maps, basically, because um, we almost lost this war, and we could have gone right back to being under British rule again. Sometimes this is called the Second American Revolution or American Revolution Part 2. So the British, besides all the fighting up in the Great Lakes area and in the Canadian border, um, the British also attack in the south, and they attack the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and they capture the capital, and they destroy much of the city, actually, which was still being built at that time, including setting fire to the Capitol building. Um, the Capitol building is attacked and taken over for the first time. The White House will be taken over and burned. Now, James Madison is the president at the time, and the British, supposedly, according to the story, they knew the British were approaching, but they thought that they wouldn't actually attack, or they thought that the small army that of Americans who were there might be able to stop them. So, but that doesn't happen. So, President Madison and his wife Dolly Madison were supposedly sitting down to dinner when they get the news that the British are getting close. You have to get out. So they rush James Madison out of the White House. They rush everyone out. Dolly Madison, the first lady, is one of the first. I'm sorry, one of the last people to leave. She kind of becomes a national hero there. One of the first women heroes in American history when she stays behind, not too long, like not where the British are going to capture her, but she's one of the last people to leave, trying to make sure that important paperwork, documents, artwork, and most famously, that painting of George Washington gets saved and taken out before the British arrive. Supposedly, the British arrive, sit down, enjoy the dinner that had been laid out for the Madisons, and then set fire to the White House. So imagine the White House, the Capitol, under control of the British. It's pretty shocking. Now, I'm going to put a link to this in Schoology. I'm not going to really require you to watch it or listen to it, but if you want to go up above and beyond and learn a little something and have a little fun, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. It's kind of interesting. NPR, if you've ever heard of NPR, I've mentioned it a few times, National Public Radio. It's a nationwide network of radio stations that basically covers news and things like that. Well, oh Jesus, what? I'm sorry, gee whiz, the 2014 it was. 2014, yeah, I should have known that, was the 200th anniversary of the capture of the White House. And in honor of that, NPR did this special broadcast. I think it's 6 or 7 minutes long, where they kind of broadcast it as if it were happening live, like the attack on the White House. They sort of recreate what it would have been like. So I'll put a link on it. You can listen to it if you would like. It's kind of interesting, even if you just listen to a little bit of it. All right, Washington, D.C. So what are you going to write in your notes here? Washington, D.C., the British captured Washington, D.C., and burned much of the city, including the White House and the Capitol. You could pause there and write that down in the notes for Washington, D.C. I will wait. Oh, I don't need to wait because you used the pause button. Hopefully not the fast forward button. All right. What else happened during this war that you need to know? Well, the last thing you can see, here's where Washington, D.C. is, fighting here, fighting up here along the Canadian border. And now we're going to go down the mighty Mississippi to New Orleans, down in this area. This is going to be the last, one of the most major, probably the biggest battle of the war, the Battle of New Orleans. And it's going to be interesting. It's going to be the biggest American victory of the war. The Americans come very close to losing this. Oh, you know what? I'm forgetting something. I'm sorry. Forget that for a second. We'll come back to New Orleans. I forgot Baltimore up here. How could I forget Baltimore up here? So the British, I said we were very close to losing this war. After capturing Washington, D.C., the British are continuing to move up this way. And next, there's really only the American forces at Baltimore are the last chance to stop the British from moving on to take Philadelphia, New York, Boston, basically take over the rest of the country for all practical purposes. And the last line of defense is kind of at Baltimore. Now, Baltimore, this is a picture of modern day Baltimore. I didn't know this back then, but down here you see Baltimore, or up at the top you see the city of Baltimore. Baltimore, the Baltimore Harbor, they have a very good harbor that made Baltimore a major city. It's defended by this fort, this island fort. It's called Fort McHenry. Fort McHenry, you can see right here. Now, Fort McHenry, at the time, that's kind of the main defense of Baltimore. And once, if the British passed here and captured Baltimore, they can go right up to Chesapeake and right, I'm sorry, Chesapeake. No, I'm confused. Yeah, and continue up to, like I said, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, etc. So this is kind of the last line of defense. Now, the commander of this fort had previously, to show the people of Baltimore that they were safe, had this giant flag erected over Fort McHenry. It was like 30 by 36 or something, some big huge flag. And anyways, during the British are going to approach the fort and basically bombard this fort for about 12 hours straight, trying to get it to surrender so they can get through to the city of Baltimore. Now, the interesting story that goes with this is that at the time, there was a lawyer from Baltimore, a guy named Francis Scott Key is the lawyer's name. And one of his clients had been captured by the British, and it was a prisoner of war. And Francis Scott Key, he goes in a rowboat before any of this fighting starts, before the battle begins, goes out and rows out to represent his client, asking the British for the release of this person. Now, the commander of the British Navy at the time says to him, "Look, we'll negotiate. Maybe I'll let you take your client home, but first we're going to attack this fort. So we can't let you go right now. It wouldn't be safe, and plus, it wouldn't be good for either of us." So they put Francis Scott Key down below deck, and he is sort of stuck on this British ship that is attacking Fort McHenry. And as it gets dark, he's kind of like looking out over the side of the ship, and he can't really see what's going on, except especially as the night falls. He can sort of see this flag though that's flying in the distance, and as as he's worrying about during this battle what's happening, he's kind of asking himself and talking to himself, I guess, saying, "Oh, can you see by the dawn's early light as the sun is coming up the next morning? They've been bombing this place all through the night. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars gave proof through the night Oh, I need to sing it to know the words. I'm getting stuck here when trying to say it. I'm sorry. Here we go. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Question mark. So there, that becomes a famous poem. Um, it's originally called "The Defense of Fort McHenry." It's later renamed "The Star-Spangled Banner," and then it's this poem gets published all over the country. It becomes a famous poem, and someone a few years later decides that it would be a good song. So they take this old British song like that they'd sing in use in taverns and stuff, and they put the words to that music, and we get the song known as the Star Spangled Banner, which later on in the 1930s, after Major League Baseball begins playing it during World War One, sort of as a patriotic move, it will later in the 1930s, Congress adopts it as the national anthem. So that's where that comes from. And this is the flag that inspired it, the original Star Spangled Banner. What is left of it, this is on display at the Smithsonian Institute of American History in Washington, D.C. And that's what you can write for your notes for Fort McHenry. Now, I know you really, really, really want me to go on and tell you about New Orleans, the Battle of New Orleans, the biggest battle of the war. But I'm afraid we're all out of time for today. We have to stop because I'm afraid it's too long now, and I'm afraid some of you are going to get mad at me. So I'm just going to stop it right there.